Big game for Kansas on Saturday against the Bearcats of Cincinnati. We preview what Cincy's going to bring to the table and the biggest matchups that could decide if KU can come out on top.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day, and thank you to the everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of LOJ, we're getting our full preview of the Kansas-Cincinnati game coming up on Saturday. Lance Leipold called the Cincinnati team the best team they've played. I don't know if I'd fully agree with that. I think it is Missouri, but that clearly speaks very highly of what the Cincinnati bunch can possibly be, and that this is going to be a very tough game for KU, to say the least. So we'll get to our storylines, injury report, Cincinnati scouting report, matchups of the game, and more on this episode of the show, which is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail with Mazda because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. Mazda, move and be moved. So Kansas, Cincinnati, Saturday at 11 a.m. Some of the top storylines. Are Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift going to show up? I think it'll be interesting. I don't know. I'm probably leaning toward it not happening. And I have no idea, like, when do the Chiefs do their, like, practice stuff and walkthrough and stuff? Is it going to work out in his schedule? But, like, it would be very interesting. And obviously the game being nearby, Chiefs are playing at least at home. I don't know. It could be interesting if that does end up happening. Now, I think from a game perspective, Kansas is the team that is now, like, it's not the hunted and the hunter, basically, but it's like Kansas had the advantage of coming off the bye last week. And, I think Kansas looked impressive enough in that game that, like, I feel confident saying that if Kansas wasn't coming off a bye, I still think they're the better team than West Virginia, and I still think they win that game, right? But does the game end up closer if you're not coming off a bye, right? And then you look at this game. Now Cincinnati is the team coming off a bye week. I would think bye weeks would be really helpful for playing KU specifically. Think about all the motions they do and the formations they run on offense, and think about on the defensive side of the ball, everything DK McDonald has been doing. A bye week would be really helpful for playing KU. So I do think that is a big storyline coming into this one, that Cincinnati now has that edge and advantage, even though it is a home game for KU. Now, I do think this game is very interesting for both teams. I don't think we know a ton about what this Cincinnati team is yet. You lose your one big game to Nebraska. You blew out one of the worst FCS teams there is, and you won by 14 over what was a solid Bowling Green team in the MAC last year that I have no idea. Are they going to be solid this year or not? I don't know. I think they're an enigma, and if they come into Kansas and win the game, you're going to view Cincinnati as like, okay, yeah, they've got a really solid squad. Versus if they lose the game, it's going to be like, I don't know, they're probably like a 5, 6, 7 win team, somewhere in that range. From the Kansas perspective, I think you view this as like, if you lose this game, you're also probably in that 6 to 7 win range. If you win this game, maybe you are more of that 8 or 9 win team. Maybe you are more of that team who can be a Big 12 title contender, because teams who are contenders for a conference beat teams like Cincinnati on their home field. They're able to take advantage of those. So I think to a certain extent, like, this will be a little bit of a litmus test for both teams, if we're being honest. Now, you look at the injury report for this one coming in. This was announced Wednesday night from the Big 12. For Cincinnati, the big ones on the question was really the big one on the question was Dante Corleone, the multiple all Big 12 defensive lineman, really good player on the interior. And he's somebody who has been, we had our crossover episode the other day, and check that out if you haven't already, where it sounds like he's somebody who's expected to play in this game, even though he is questionable. But the question is more going to be, how much does he play? Does he play to an extent where he is a full-time player, full-time starter? Or is it going to be like it's been recently, where he's played in some games, but it's been more of kind of a snap count for him? That'll be very interesting, certainly coming off the bye week. I'm thinking he's going to play a big snap count in this game, which certainly will make things more difficult for the interior and overall the KU offensive line against Cincinnati. You look at the KU side of the injury report, Dylan Brooks, Jack Schneider, David Abajian, Jason Strickland, and Conley Hovey, still all players who are out, but none of those really expected to be on the 2 deep. I guess maybe Brooks if you were healthy and playing well. We know Devin Dye is going to be out the first half because of the targeting call back in the second half, and he's had a good start to the season, so that is a real loss for KU. The probable side, so this is good. Austin Alexander, DJ Graham, and Taylor Davis. That's obviously really important that Davis has moved up from last week. He was questionable. This week now on the probable side, because with Dye out for the first half, that's important to see. And it sounds like Graham continuing to deal with something, but on the better side of it, he's now listed as the starter too over Alexander. And then you get into the questionable and doubtful, and this is where it's a little, I guess with the questionable, like Bryce Cahoon, more of the back end of the receiver room. Same with Jaden Nickens, and as far as guys on the 2 deep. Not in the case of Nickens, but the doubtful is the bad one for KU. The first one is Daniel Hishaw, right? We didn't know based on last week. Okay, he's obviously in street clothes for the second half. What was going to be the status this week for Daniel Hishaw? And being doubtful means that, yes, there is an opening that things could turn around and he could play. But for the most part, most guys who end up on doubtful end up not playing. Now, this is doubtful on Wednesday as opposed to being doubtful on Friday. So that is at least a little bit of something that maybe can help KU here. But the fact that he was in straight, it wasn't like he was in his uniform and they were just like, hey, we're just abundance of caution in the second half. He's in street clothes in the second half. Now, the good news, though, is that with Hishaw, if he were listed as just straight up out, that could imply that the injury is a multiple weeks thing. The fact that it's doubtful, where it's at least holding on to a sliver of hope, does at least tell me that, okay, this is something where he doesn't play this week, most likely you would think, but maybe that means he can trend in the right direction to play the following week or the week after that. It tells me that it's not, and again, I don't know what the injury is, but it tells me that it's not something that's going to be season ending. Now, maybe it's just a terminology thing, and that's just me overreading into the situation, but kind of good and bad news that you wouldn't have him. And you think about this Cincinnati team, and for Kansas, that just means a lot on Leshawn Williams and a lot on some young running backs to kind of step up in this game against the Bearcats. The other doubtful one is one that, I haven't heard a lot of in terms of the injury as much. Obviously Hishaw has been kind of the headline one for KU, is Mason Ellis. And Ellis is somebody who's, played a much bigger role on this year's team. He's been a good special teams player for KU in the past. This year, getting real run and reps and snaps on the defensive side, and has helped KU kind of play a lot of 3 safety looks. And as we know, as we mentioned, with Devin Dye out for the first half, with Taylor Davis sounding like he's going to play, but somebody who is at least still dealing with an injury, it'd be nice to have as much, safety power as possible, so to speak. The good news is Kansas does seem to have good depth at the safety position, right? You will at least get Dye back for the second half. Davis coming into it. Lyric Rawls is off to an awesome season for KU, the transfer from Oklahoma State. Jalon Dye is coming off a really good performance in around 20 snaps against West Virginia. But you're starting to get that depth even tested even more with some of this stuff. So the hope would be that Ellis can come back soon, I would think, and that Davis is fully good to go, and that Dye can come back in the second half and make a big impact for KU. So not as good of an injury report as it was the week before with West Virginia, but I guess that makes sense because Kansas was coming off a bye week, and in the same light for Cincinnati, they're coming off a bye week now, which always makes things a little bit tougher or better for a certain team. Based on where that goes. All right, let's get to our Cincinnati scouting report next and the matchups of the game. This is Locked on Jayhawks. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by DoorDash. It is almost the weekend. Let's look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered. Powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For the Jayhawks, we're going to go with Leshawn Williams. He delivered in a big way. Daniel Hishaw injured, as we just kind of talked about, and Williams ended up with well over 100 yards rushing. He had I don't know if it was the play of the game, but it certainly, you could make the argument, was the coolest highlight of the game. That 62-yard rushing touchdown that he had was an unbelievable move. I think EA Sports College Football, the official account, gave it their controller moving play of the week. It was a really cool play to kind of cap off the victory for KU, and just capped off a really strong performance by him. And Leshawn Williams is going to be counted on this week against Cincinnati as well. And so just like he delivered for the Jayhawks, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. You can get in on the Kansas game against Cincinnati, minus 5.5 on FanDuel right now, minus 196 on the money line. The over-under has been moving up. It's now 56.5. Actually kind of lean toward the under right now, but the fact that the number's going up maybe makes me want to wait a little longer to see what the closing line ends up being. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Thanks for joining us on Locked On Jayhawks, making it your first listen every day. You can give me a follow on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio or our show account at LO_Jayhawks. Okay, so what does Cincinnati bring to the table? They're 2-1 on the season. They lost in their opener 20-17 to Nebraska. And Nebraska is not one of the best teams in the country, but they're a solid team. Nebraska will probably be, 6, 7, 8 win team. And that was basically a road game for Cincinnati because Arrowhead was packed with Husker fans. So that was a tough environment to play in, and they played very well. They beat Bowling Green, who was a really good team in the MAC last year, though they did lose some key players off that team, like Joseph Sipp at Kansas, like Harold Fannin, who's off with the Cleveland Browns and stuff. But they won that one by 14, and then they just demolished Northwestern State. 70-0 was the score there. And, that's one of the worst teams at the FCS level, so you would expect that to be the case. Their coach is Scott Satterfield. He was at Appalachian State. He was the coach right before Eli Drinkwitz. I don't think there's a connection there. Drinkwitz was like the offensive coordinator at NC State before he came to Appalachian State. So I don't think this is a situation where, I don't know, maybe there is some sort of tie between the two of them. Maybe they do know each other from at least coaching at Appalachian State, and he is going to talk to Eli Drinkwitz about what works against Kansas. Maybe not. I have no idea. But 51-24 at Appalachian State. Then he goes to Louisville. He goes 25-24 in 4 seasons there. Now he's gone 10-17 at Cincinnati, but slowly has built this thing up. They went from being a bad team a couple years ago when Kansas blew them out on the road to being a competitive team last year that probably should have made a bowl, but kind of collapsed at the end of the season and had similar struggles to Kansas in one-score games. And then now this team looking like the one that's going to get them back to bowl eligibility. They were picked 9th in the preseason by Phil Steele and by Pick 6 Previews, so kind of picked in the middle of the pack there. Right now on ESPN SP Plus has them 48th. Kansas, for what it's worth, is 27th. And SP Plus also gives them the number 61 offense, number 41 defense, and number 72 special teams. And then if you look at ESPN FPI, Kansas also 27th there. Cincinnati is 46th. When you look at some of the preseason magazines, what it illustrates for some of their strengths and weaknesses, and I think honestly this has been kind of backed up with their performance so far this year. Their strengths in the preseason were listed as running back, which I would just extend to the running game when you have a running quarterback, and the lines of scrimmage, both offensive and defensive line. And so far they've kind of lived up to the billing early in the year. Now, the weaknesses preseason were listed as linebackers and DBs. I would say hit or miss, just depends on the linebacker specifically. And then with the DBs, they are giving up a good amount of opportunities in the air, so I could see that kind of being the case. The quarterback for Cincinnati, it's Brendan Sorsby. He is a 6'3", 235-pound quarterback who's in his junior year, second year as a starter at Cincinnati. He was starting some games at Indiana the year prior, so experienced quarterback. And he's off to a great start. 70% completion rate. 10.2 yards per attempt, 8 touchdowns, 1 interception. He also has 175 on the ground, 4 rushing touchdowns on 8 yards per carry. So total up 12 touchdowns, 1 interception, 89 total QBR. That's top 10 in the country. Now, it is important to note, and this doesn't just go for Sorsby, this goes for all of Cincinnati's stats right now. The stats are going to look very, very good because, okay, for instance, like we said, Northwestern State is literally one of the worst teams at the FCS level. And against Northwestern State, he went 15 of 15 for 253 yards, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. That's going to pad the stats, right? If we only look at his lone Power 4 game, which was against Nebraska, really good on the ground, 13 carries, 96 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's something Kansas has to deal with. But he struggled in the air. 13 of 25, 69 yards with an interception. So I think if you told Kansas that can be the case in this game, you would absolutely take that he has 96 rushing yards, but he only has 69 passing yards. You would take that in a heartbeat. Now, there's by far two huge zones that he has thrown to the most so far this season, between 0 to 10 yards and 0 yards and behind the line of scrimmage in the middle third. So you take the field, cut it into thirds, left, middle, right, and you just look at basically behind the line of scrimmage all the way up to 10 yards. In the middle of the field, that area is where he's throwing the ball by far the most. He's 12 of 14 for 100 yards over the middle between 0 to 10 yards. He's also 10 of 11 for 49 yards and 3 touchdowns over that middle third and behind the line of scrimmage. So that is a total of, if you're just taking between behind the line of scrimmage, 10 yards past, that's a total of 22 for 25, 149 yards and 3 touchdowns in just that zone. He doesn't have any more than 6 throws in any other zone passing. And if you look at last year's passing chart to be like, okay, that gives us a wider sample size, it also is a ton of throws over the middle of the field at every level. So behind the line of scrimmage, 0 to 10 yards, 10 to 20 yards, 20 plus yards, the most popular throwing zone for him at every one of those levels. Again, behind the line of scrimmage, 0 to 10 yards, 10 to 20 yards, 20 plus yards. All 4 of those zones, if you look at which is the most popular, left, center, right, it's the middle on all 3. So you look at it, and as the defense, that means the spine of your defense, the middle of your defense, that's what's going to get tested in this game, passing against Cincinnati. A couple other things to note. His yard per attempt drops 4.5 yards per attempt when under pressure. Most quarterbacks are worse under pressure, but that is a very sizable drop. That number was lower last year, but more normal, 1.5 yards per attempt last year. But again, kind of small sample size, and he hasn't been pressured a lot because he hasn't been sacked, and they've played like Northwestern State and Bowling Green. So it's a little harder to say right now. But he's completing, this one's interesting, 77% of Sorsby's passes have been completed off play action this year on 13 yards per attempt. He's only completing 60% of his passes this year on 7 yards per attempt on non-play action. So that's another key for Kansas. Can you defend the play action? Let's get to our key stats. 5 happy stats for Cincinnati. They are top 30 on Pro Football Focus in both run and pass blocking. This has been a really good start for the offensive line. Again, schedule is not the best so far, but they did play Nebraska too. They haven't given up a sack, and they are number 1, according to Pick 6 Preview's advanced stats, in offensive line run push. Okay, second happy stat. They are number 3 in the country on Pro Football Focus in tackling grade. So they've done a really good job tackling in the open field. Number 3 happy stat. They are number 34 in the country on Pro Football Focus in coverage grade. They've combined that with at least a good coverage grade, though some of the passing stats against them indicate something different. So I don't know. Something's got to give there. They're also 97th percentile. Here's our 4th stat in early downs EPA per play, meaning on first and second downs, especially those first downs, they are really rocking it on the offensive side of the ball and picking up good chunks that are setting them up for shorter downs on second and third down. And then they're 79th percentile, so very good at that in avoiding explosive plays on defense. Kansas hasn't hit a ton of explosive plays so far this year, oddly enough, more so in the running game than the passing game, but Cincinnati's not giving up very often. And that'll make things more difficult if that continues to be the case in this one. They've been kind of a bend but don't break defense to this point in time. 5 sad stats for Cincinnati. They're at number 120 nationally on Pro Football Focus in pass rush grade. So they haven't really got to the quarterback a ton. They are in the 11th percentile, so you want to be on the higher end. That's not great there. In late down success rate, despite the early down success rate, late down success rate has not followed for them. They're also 12th percentile in average third down distance on defense, meaning other teams are getting really short, third downs against them. And that'll be interesting because we've talked about this a lot this week, that the Kansas offense has a lower third down percentage than you might think based on the average third down that they're getting and based on how well they've done on third downs the previous 3 seasons. Maybe this is a game where it kind of reverts because Cincinnati's given up a lot of short third downs too. Cincinnati's also 24th percentile in pass EPA per play defense. That's what I'm talking about there when you're talking about, okay, they are giving up a lot against the pass, and that does take into account that like Dylan Raiola hasn't been like that great for Nebraska, that you've played Bowling Green and Northwestern State too. So I do think there's going to be opportunity in the air for Kansas in this game. And then here's the other one. This actually technically isn't a Cincinnati stat, but it circles around to a Cincinnati stat. Michigan just played Nebraska, right? Common opponent. Nebraska played Cincinnati. Michigan ran for 290 yards on 9 yards per carry in the game against Nebraska. And the reason I bring that up is because Cincinnati, again, when you're trying to figure out what they are against Bowling Green, a bad FCS team, and then Nebraska, you point to the Nebraska game most because the Nebraska game's against a Power 4 opponent. And you say, okay, Cincinnati clearly is a really good running team. Did you see how much they ran for against Nebraska? Is it entirely possible after the Nebraska just gave up 9 yards per carry and almost 300 rushing yards to Michigan? What if Nebraska is just like a horrible run defense? And so then at that point, that possible strength for the Bearcats maybe isn't as much of a strength as we might have thought. So I do think that is at least interesting, and we'll find out more about that, in this game. All right, let's get to our matchups of the game next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Today's episode of LOJ is brought to you by Mazda, moving the game forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, they move culture, and they keep moving the game forward. This week's moment that moved the game forward, we're just going to go to the first KU offensive drive of the game. They get to a 4th down and short, and it's like, are they going to go for it? They're on the plus side of the field, around midfield. Are they going to punt the football away? They decide to go for it, and Levi Wentz gets wide freaking open, and Jalon Daniels hits him. Wentz is off and running, scores a long touchdown for KU, sets the tone. They get those early points, and KU never goes back from there. They led the entire way against West Virginia, starting with that, setting the tone. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll be back on Friday to talk keys for Kansas to take on Cincinnati, players to watch as well in that one, and get to a little FanDuel Friday. We'll also have a bonus episode on Friday talking Talon Kinney, kind of previewing that commitment because he's going to be committing over the weekend, and opportunity for Kansas to get on the board in the class of 2026. Okay, matchups of the game for Kansas against Cincinnati. First down, the Kansas linebackers in coverage, possibly in spy against Cincinnati. So in 2024, 53%, over half of Brendan Sorsby's passes were over the middle of the field. And again, you just think about it from a perfect perspective. There's 3/3 to the field, left, center, and right. So you would think that it would be a little closer to, be evenly distributed. No, over half are going over the middle. So far in 2025, 52% of his throws are in the middle of the third. That means linebackers and some safeties. And we know Kansas is a little beat up and a little thinner at the safety position because of the Devin Dye first half suspension, because Mason Ellis is banged up, because, Taylor Davis playing right now, but he's a little banged up. So that means a lot on the linebackers. That means a lot on those safeties that are going to be tested in this game. Now, the good news is Trey Lathan and Bengali Kamara have been awesome so far this season. Lathan coming off an interception. Even despite some of the injuries at safety, they've found ways to have success at that position so far for KU. But they're going to be tested in this game. And then you add to the fact it's not just the passing game where you're going to be tested over the middle. Sorsby's a really stellar runner. And so it'll be interesting to see, a lot of times the linebackers are the ones that have to make those tackles. Does KU use a spy on any plays or for a majority of the game? And a lot of times if there is a spy, it ends up being a linebacker or one of those hard-hitting safeties. Then when it's a designed run for the quarterback, the linebacker has to get in. So this is, as much as we've talked about the overhauled linebacker room and how good this unit's been for KU this year, this is the game specifically where it matters the most, I think, for KU so far this season. Second down, defending outside runs. It's funny, there's a lot of similarities between these two teams, and one of those similarities is the fact that Cincinnati likes to run outside. The 3 most popular zones that they've run to so far this year, not counting quarterback scrambles, is number 1 off left edge, number 2 is off right guard, and number 3 is off right edge. So a lot of running to the perimeter for Cincinnati, right? You would think of like wide zone and halfback stretch plays, a lot of stuff that Kansas does similarly. In fact, Kansas has 26 runs off left edge, 27 runs off right edge, no other zone with more than 16 rushing attempts. So whichever defense can defend the outside run and whichever offense can execute that better is going to be in really good shape, because it is kind of a fundamental thing of what both teams want to try to do. Third down, Jalon Daniels hitting the gimmies and KU receivers hauling them in. Again, Cincinnati has shown some holes at times as a pass defense, and that's against not always the best, opposing offenses in the country. Jalon Daniels only completed 50% of his passes last week. Now, to his credit, some of those were drops, some of those were misses, some of those were, him taking a one-on-one shot, and it was just a better play by the DB to come down with it. Now, in the end of the day, like, Jalon Daniels still played a very good game, and he wound up with a 91.9 QBR, which takes into account, like, the down and distance and how you're performing on key downs. He still ended up with a 92 QBR. And on the season, he has an 82.5 QBR, which is top 15 in the country. He's had a really good start to the season so far. But in this specific game where Cincinnati is more bend, don't break, and they're basically saying, hey, we're hoping you make a mistake. Cincinnati doesn't have an interception so far this season, but right now, and maybe I just jinxed it, so I don't know. Jalon Daniels, I apologize to you for doing that, but Cincinnati is dead last, not just in the Big 12, but Cincinnati is dead last in the country in completion percentage allowed defensively. They're giving up 76% in the air. So they're basically saying, not only are we bend, don't break, but don't break, we are just giving you whatever you want in the short passing game. At the same point, and nobody else in the Big 12 has given up even higher than 67%. So it's like not even close. But they're also really good at preventing explosive plays. So far this season, mentioned this number earlier, they've done an excellent job, 79th percentile defensively in avoiding explosive plays. So they're not giving up big plays. They're basically saying, hey, we're going to make you be patient. We're going to make you hit all your passes. We're going to make you be accurate and consistent. And so that puts pressure on Jalon Daniels. If he can do those things, Kansas will have a successful game. If you get, a little greedy or, you end up throwing one or forcing one here or there, that's where Cincinnati comes out and feels like they won that specific play or possession. Fourth down, special teams have been special for both teams. Kansas ranks 12th on ESPN's FPI in special teams rating. Cincinnati ranks 17th. So both of them, by those special teams efficiencies, have been really good to start this year. And we talked a lot this week that this is the best special teams of the Lance Leipold era, and it makes sense. It's not just statistically right now. It's, you look at the personnel and what they have, it makes sense, and it feels sustainable in what they're doing right now. But this will be a good test because it's a really good special teams unit in Cincinnati so far to this season. And in a game that could be close, and I guess that's an honorable mention, how do you handle close games? Because both teams struggled in those a season ago. But special teams could be something that certainly swings the game one way or another. I'll give an honorable mention matchup here too. What happens first? So I mentioned Cincinnati doesn't have an interception as a defense. Cincinnati also hasn't given up a sack from their offensive line. So what happens first? Does Cincinnati get an interception, or does Cincinnati give up a sack, i.e. Kansas gets a sack in this game? And, what ends up happening more often, obviously from the Kansas perspective, you would hope that the sack is the one that comes through there, but that'll be something interesting to monitor as well. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. Again, keys to the game, how does Kansas win, players to watch, a little bonus Taylor Kinney episode coming up tomorrow on Locked On Jayhawks on your Friday as well. See you next time with LOJ.